what a joke. This is not a civil disobedience movement because the things they're doing is not civil disobedience. It's fundamentally interrupting with private enterprise. It's disruption and it's against the law. It's not protest. It's not civil disobedience. It's straightforward disruption. And frankly, I'm not going to I shouldn't be drawn straight to the politics of this, but their cause is just, but their actions are completely, misconstrued.
Graham Buss is the spokesperson for Just Stop Oil and joins us this morning. Good morning, Graham.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the programme.
Great pleasure. A lot of people will want to know the answer to this question, Graham, which is, how do you draw a line from throwing a jigsaw on the grass at Wimbledon to changing policy in any meaningful way? Why do you do it?
That's a very good question. I think what we need to start from is to look at joining the dots. This morning, I've been listening to your programme. You were talking about mortgages, interest rates. In California, State Farm, which is the major insurance company there, have said they will stop providing insurance to new policy holders because of the catastrophic exposure, the catastrophic risk. Now, if you can't get insurance, you can't buy a house. And if you want to sell your house and the person wants to buy it and they can't get insurance, they can't buy it, can they? And that's because of forest fires. And in Canada, 1 in 10 houses is uninsurable for flooding. So let's join the dots and look at, you had a thing this morning about airlines. Escape the British weather was what the guy from Jet2 said. Escape the British weather. June was the hottest month on record for June this year. Last year, it was 40 degrees C. I had some friends who wanted to go to Spain on holiday. They said it was too hot to fly. The Lake District's bone dry. You go to the south of France to enjoy the smoke, don't you? Because of all the fires there. Let's be reasonable about this.
So what are you asking for? Because this has to be an ask, hasn't it? Because this is happening all the time. You go to Wimbledon, you throw a jigsaw about, people boo. What do you want to happen? I mean, you call Just Stop Oil. Are you plausibly saying that you want the British government to stop using all oil and gas now, as of today?
No, that's exactly not what we're saying. And we've made this, our demand is very common sense, very reasonable, in line with all the science, in line with the International Energy Agency, in line with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in line with vast numbers of organisations. The British Medical Association all support this demand. The demand is no new oil and gas. That means that we husband the resource that we have now, and we husband that resource. We stretch it out as long as we can, and that's enough time to move ourselves off oil and gas in many of the activities we engage in this country. And the thing about continuing to invest in oil and gas, which of course is massively supported by the government, who give huge tax relief to the government, to the oil companies. The point about continuing to invest in oil and gas is it slows down the transition into renewables.
So Labour have a policy of no new oil and gas fields. Once they get into power, is your job done?
When that demand is met, we will stop. But of course, they're not in power yet. We could be 2 years. 2 years is a very long time. Sir David King, former chief scientist of the government, said the next few years, he said this more than a year ago now, will determine the future of humanity. This is the decade that matters. We cannot wait. So we have to keep going, even though we can't wait for the Labour government to come into power. We have to do it now.
But the problem you've got here is that, and this is the question about joining the dots. You make a very passionate case and scientific case for the need to arrest climate change. How does going to Wimbledon, throwing some jigsaw bits around, which makes Chris Philp come out and say, we're going to look to crack down on you even harder. We want Wimbledon to injunct you from coming in. That's not convincing the government. I don't know how much it convinces the probably quite influential people who are sitting around Wimbledon, who are watching the tennis. I don't think they come out of it thinking, do you know what, I'm going to start lobbying for greater control over the oil and gas industry. I don't see how I can see your first position and I can see where you want to get to. I just don't see how one gets to three, as it were.
We're not trying to be popular. We're trying to be effective.
You're doing a pretty good job then in some respects.
Being popular is not. Non-violent civil resistance movements through history are always not popular. They start off being unpopular and they end up building statues to them in Parliament Square. So let's get this right. It's not about being popular. It's about making change. Now, the government made a commitment in the Paris Agreement to inform the public of the severity of the climate change. Yeah, and they are not doing their job. We're doing their job for them. Perhaps they think that if they did their job properly, they'd be unpopular. And people don't like change, do they? I mean, I can completely understand why people find it hard to address this issue. I find it hard to address this issue. I mean, it's a very upsetting place to be. But by ignoring it, you don't go to your doctor and you want to go to your doctor to get the truth. You don't want your doctor just to tell you what you want to hear, do you?
Yeah, but I want my doctor to fundamentally change things. I don't want my doctor just to shout. And that's the issue. That I understand what you're saying, but I just still don't see how, Extinction Rebellion, they've changed their tactics. They said we've got to stop annoying people, because when we annoy people, we actually stop them thinking along the lines we want them to think along. We actually push them further away from the goal that we're seeking to attain. Is that not a worry for you, that the more you wind people up, the more you seek unpopularity, actually you harm your cause rather than propagate it?
I think you need to show evidence that that's the case, because I haven't seen any evidence that that's the case. What I've seen is a steadily increasing concern from ordinary people like us, Just Stop Oil, are ordinary people, about the severity of the climate crisis that we're facing. Okay. So I think we are making a difference.
Well, Graham, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
My pleasure.
That's Graham Buss, their spokesperson for Just Stop Oil.
Let's also speak to someone who understands the security and strategy at play here. Nick Aldworth is a former detective chief superintendent for counter-terrorism and is now a threat, risk and security strategist. Good morning to you, Nick.
Good morning. I think if you want some evidence around annoying people, I'll give it to you now.
Right. Okay. Go on then.
Well, look, he just described himself as a non-violent civil disobedience movement. I mean, what a joke. This is not a civil disobedience movement, because the things they're doing is not civil disobedience. It's fundamentally interrupting with private enterprise. It's disruption, and it's against the law. It's not protest. It's not civil disobedience. It's straightforward disruption. And frankly, I'm not going to I shouldn't be drawn straight to the politics of this, but their cause is just, but their actions are completely, misconstrued.
So what should they do instead? I mean, the whole point is, I suppose, we're talking about it. They have a very specific MO now, don't they? I mean, many people associate the colour orange now with this. People know exactly what it means. So from that point of view, it is effective, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I always associate the colour orange, or certainly saffron, with Hare Krishnas. So I don't think they've got exclusivity around colour. And orange obviously aligned to the Orangemen of Ulster. So, I think there's a naivety among this group, albeit, listen, their cause is absolutely right. But in terms of security, which I guess is what I'm here to talk about, it's always got an opinion, sorry. Look, the reality is it's very, very easy to disrupt any event anywhere. It really is. Unless we want to start viewing sports from behind really significant barriers, unless we want to start paying, significantly more on our tickets because of the additional security that's required, unless we want to start queuing for longer, which of course creates its own risks from terrorism. We have to some degree suffer the idiocy that is being played out before us. And I don't mean to be quite as condemning as that, but in some cases, when you look at things like Animal Rising, jumping in front of a 500-pound horse running at 25 miles an hour, that's going to end in catastrophe at some point.
Well, it's funny because you talk about horses, and people talk about the Grand National. They talk about the suffragettes, Emily Wilding Davison, who did exactly that and died. It was a king's horse, I think, wasn't it? People thought at the time, many people would have been disgusted at what she did, actually, even though she died. But, women then subsequently did get the vote.
Yeah, but not exclusively from that action. And of course, the suffragette movement went on for many years and involved significant civil disobedience. I think there's just a byline to that story about Emily, which is the jockey of that horse ended up committing suicide because of the trauma that he'd been put through by that act. And so history plays things out in very different ways. But I think, in terms of security, if this is the tactic that Just Stop Oil want to continue with, then inside those private events, we're well covered by the act of aggravated trespass, certainly open air events. You can apply additional security measures, but the reality is people want those to be proportionate. And the reality is that you're not going to find every disruptive item unless you become, you start searching intimately.
No, and well, let's not do that. The other point, of course, here is that there was disruption, but it was quite short-lived, wasn't it? I mean, no one wants disruption if you're organising a tournament and things have to run to time. The damage wasn't permanent. It wasn't like at the snooker where it had to stop for quite a while.
Exactly, and I know that organisations like Wimbledon take this really seriously, but equally they do recognise that it has to be proportionate. And actually, do you know what? Yesterday's response at Wimbledon I thought was really, really effective. I thought the response at Lords the other week was really, really effective. And if we do have to suffer these inconveniences, and this is what they are, this is why people are irritated, because they're inconveniences that actually achieve very little. They are minimal, and I think we can tolerate that. I think to some degree, the wind will disappear out of this form of protest because it largely achieves very little other than, an opportunity to come onto a radio show like this and not answer the questions that are put to them.
Right, okay, Nick. Well, you certainly answered the questions. And in fact, some I didn't even ask you. So thank you for that. That's Nick Aldworth, former Detective Chief Superintendent for Counter-Terrorism and who's now a threat risk and security strategist.
Pete says, I've